Democrats voted for a lot of this stuff too. And the way I look at it, they all belong in jail. People forget that the government is something that you own. They work for you. You pay their salary. This is not something that is put in place to rule you. They work for you. And you should regard the activities of anybody who's in public office the same way. If you were an employer, you were going to regard the work of an employee. If the guy is stealing from you, he's your employee, what do? Hire him, keep paying him more money and keep him on the job? I'd go in there and look at the voting record of everybody in the Congress and anybody who allowed that deregulation that set the stage for the S&Ls to crumble like that. Send them to jail. They're varmints. Get them all in jail. And not a country club jail either.
Frank, how come it seems that we're not hearing about the SNL thing as much in the media as we should? I mean, you'd think the role of any watchdog would be get excited if there was something they could grab on. Are they not doing their watchdog role properly anymore?
Watchdog? Look at who owns the media. Who owns it? Liberals? I mean, all the media outlets basically are owned by the forces of evil. These are guys who will take that phone call from Sununu at the White House, and if he doesn't like the spin that you're putting on the news, you're going to change your spin.
All right, well, what's changed from the days then when Watergate?
That was that was an amazing thing in American politics, because nobody had ever thought before that we could have a president that was such a scumbag, that would stoop to something like that. That was a shock to the American mentality. But after that, we found out that was just the beginning. That was the tip of the iceberg. Under Ronald Reagan, you had Oliver North, a man who, in the course of his activities, drafted a plan for the suspension of the U.S. Constitution, and nobody batted an eye. Don't we remember that? That was what he did. It wasn't just shipping a few arms here and taking a few bucks there. And when you get right down to it, the reason you're not hearing more about the S&L situation is there's CIA involvement in it. They were using the S&Ls to launder money to help pay for the war in Nicaragua. In one case, in Florida, Singlob and this female talk show, conservative talk show host from a radio station. See, I was discussing this the other day on KFI with Tom Likas. He said he used to be on the same station with this female conservative talk show host, and she was always, dealing with the Contra topic and all the rest of that stuff. Well, she was a partner with Singlob in an SNL, which was doing this. And there was other SNLs in Texas that were doing this. There's a lot of people that would like to see the whole topic of SNLs go away, but let's don't stop there. Let's take a look at HUD and all the favors that were done. You could get millions of dollars of free money from HUD if, one, you were a Republican, and two, you were a born-again Christian, because at the time that was the prerequisite for getting your deal approved as opposed to somebody else. And they were always looking to see whether you were a Republican supporter or whether you were a Christian.
So if we don't have free speech radio like Pacifica, do you see mainstream journalism, real journalism, hard journalism as something that's going to soon become a thing of the past?
I think that hard journalism is already pretty soft in this country because it's not the reporters' fault. The reporters do dig up the news. They find the stuff and they try and get it into the paper. But remember, the paper itself is owned by guys who are usually of the Republican or extreme right persuasion. And they're not going to print certain things. There's certain kinds of stories which never get into the Los Angeles Times. There's certain stories that will never get into the Washington Post. And there's certain stories that will always get into the Washington Times because of the kind of paper it is.
Do you think that a lot of stories don't get into because they're not sexy enough, because they're not glamorous enough, because they're not, well, in the case perhaps they're too intellectual or something? No,
in the case of TV, the story's not going to go on unless there's a good picture, because TV is a pictorial medium. But there's no excuse in the world of newspapers. And news is news.
I'm talking about even people who were semi-respected talk show hosts in years gone by, where they did a lot of political analysis. They had a lot of political guests, and now they're not having them anymore because they're having only flashy things, glitzy things that will get ratings.
Well, ratings have always been a matter of concern if you're in an advertising-driven medium. And even a newspaper is an advertising-driven medium. Do you think that if you were going to do an expose on the evil doings of a large department store chain, and you had a newspaper that wouldn't harm your profit picture?
You mentioned a bit before about the economics of all this, and the government sponsorship of the arts is one thing, but commercial considerations of moral content is kind of a whole nother ball of wax. In the last couple of months, we've seen threaded boycotts for Married with Children, Domino's Pizza pulling their advertising off of NBC's Saturday Night Live, the whole thing with The Last Temptation of Christ, where boycotts were threatened. Do you think the economic bottom line is a way of, corporations who own these things of causing content producers to censor themselves?
Of course.
The bottom line.
Bottom line, it's one guy or a board of directors who decides, well, we're going to shove our weight around. We have the cash, and our cash is the engine that drives the media, and we will withhold the cash unless we have things our way.
How did it work 20 years ago when independent record companies, small-timers all around the country could survive against the big-timers? CBS still existed back then. How come the little guy had a better chance of surviving then than he does now?
Well, I think it's a matter of sophistication, that the business has become more sophisticated and has gotten smaller in terms of the number of players, because a lot of those little companies that you mentioned in this mythological golden era of the past, they did disappear. If everything was so good for them, they'd still be around. Most of them showed up, made a couple of bucks, or lost their shirt and got out of the business.
And got gobbled up by the big guys.
Or just gobbled out of the picture. They weren't assimilated into the larger companies. They were just knocked out of business. The problem of being a little independent record company is, let's say you've got a company with one artist, and that artist has a record which is a hit this week, and it's really hot, and you have to press tons of records and ship it out into the stores. Guess what? They have 90 days to pay you, and at the end of 90 days, they won't pay you, because you got nothing coming up later that gives you leverage that allows you to collect from the retailers. So the retailers have played a role in putting these guys out of business too. I know, because I went through it myself with an independently distributed label in the late 60s. And we were put into a position where, in order to collect from the retailers, we would have had to sue them under the laws of every state where the retailer existed. And they know that, and so that's one of the reasons why small labels have to be distributed by larger labels, because the larger label has the muscle to collect from the retailer.
I'm going to get a little bit more on mainstream kind of stuff, because we're talking about economic bottom lines, and most people get their mass culture from either big record labels, as we said, or from television and things like that. And in mainstream films, where producers are getting more and more concerned about not showing a lot of drinking teens and having to show pro-social values and having to have sex with condoms on. That's
silly, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's silly and it's boring, and you'll get more of it unless people decide that they suddenly don't want to go watch those movies and don't buy tickets to it.
Do you think that'll eventually cause a rebirth of independent filmmakers, European films in America?
No. Because there's a distribution bottleneck. All of this hinges on, if you make a product, how do you get it to the marketplace? In the case of films, look at how they're exhibited. You have a lot of little independent theaters. Suppose you're a person and you're given the choice between going to Joe Blow's little ratty theater that'll show anything, or to some Cineplex situation that's better sound and cleaner seating and all the rest of that. You can't get into those major exhibition facilities unless you are putting in the kind of product that they will exhibit. And so an artist can make whatever he wants to make so long as he can afford to make it, but he can't sell it unless he can get it through the distribution chain. That's the same story with a record, with a film, or any other kind of thing.
Well, you tell me, are you being pessimistic about the future? It seems like isn't there a chain in popular arts where things get conservative and things get more progressive? It seems like you're suggesting it's just going to keep on getting more and more conservative.
No, I'm not suggesting that at all. What's conservative about Two Live Crew? Is that conservative? That exists today.
Indeed.
Okay,
more outrageous.
So, I don't even think it's outrageous. It's just, it's one of those kinds of things. Right, and it does exist today. There's all different kinds of things which exist today. Conservative, liberal, progressive, absurd, you name it, it does exist today. But what you know about is only what manages to get through the distribution channels. There are plenty of artists doing things, I'm taking this on faith, but I'm sure that